actually, we don't use affirmations and denials in the sense of repeating statements of truth. Our use of affirmation and denial would be more along the line of merely knowing a truth. Well, for instance, in that illustration with the doctor, when he spoke about his condition there, or the laws of disease, and the answer came back, there is no law of disease. That was a statement of truth that was answering the claim or statement that there is a law of disease. Now, in our work, there would be no such thing as repeating that statement again, although there would be such a thing as remembering it every time that the thought of law came. For instance, we have at certain seasons of the year infectious and contagious diseases, very prevalent in the United States, other countries too. Now, everyone who has been in metaphysics for any length of time knows that these are very, very simple things to heal. Grippe, flu, pneumonia. These in metaphysics yield usually in a few hours, rarely more than, I don't think I've ever known a case to go beyond 24 hours. And the reason is, now this is not an affirmation or denial, this is a statement of truth. There is no such thing as a law of infection or contagion. There is a prevalent belief, a materia medica belief, and the whole world suffers from that every winter or summer or whenever these seasons come on, and they have them. But actually, there is no such thing. There's no such thing as a law of infection or contagion, and everybody in the metaphysical world knows it because everybody has been called into homes where they are, and our practitioners don't go around getting diseases by infection or contagion. Very seldom in metaphysical movements like unity and Christian Science, very seldom do you see much absences during the cold and grippe and flu seasons. Very seldom, and when they are, it's only for short periods, whereas in other churches, the place can be half empty. Or in offices, very rarely do you find a Christian Scientist or a unity student out very long, whereas the rest of the office may be depleted during the winter months. The same in schools. I've watched it over 24 years, that schools sometimes have absences up to as high as 50% of a class. But they'll never have anything like that among their Christian Science or unity students. They never will have it. Why? There's no such thing as a law of infection or contagion. There's no law to it, and therefore the realization of that breaks it instantly. Now, supposing we were faced with a practice, and supposing we had 10, 15, 20 cases come to us today of grippe, flu, pneumonia, colds, fevers. You can see how many times in that day the telephone ringing, people coming, and your own thoughts coming back to you, that you would be presented within yourself with this claim of infection and contagion. And so every time that came to your thought, you might renew within yourself that remembrance that, there is no such law. And in that way, then, you would be using the letter of truth, making a statement of truth. But you would not sit down and say, there is no law of infection, there is no law of contagion, there is no law of... In that way, we do not use affirmations in this work. But we do use a statement of truth to refute the appearance. And so it is with the denial. We certainly will deny that there's any truth to disease. We certainly deny that there's any law to disease. But we won't make the same statement twice in succession. We won't sit down and declare it twice over or 3 times over or 4 times. Or, as a teacher once recommended in a Sunday school, in Christian Science Sunday school, to the pupils, If you just recite the scientific statement of being 100 times, you'll be healed of anything. Well, that's, for us, an improper use of affirmation. Be perfectly legitimate to remind yourself there is no life in disease, there is no life in matter, there's no life in form, all life is God. That would be legitimate. But then to sit down and repeat it over and over and over, from our standpoint, would not be. Is that what you mean?
Mr. Goldsmith, if you had a case of anemia, would your consciousness connect yourself on the idea that there is no lack? Is that?
No. You see, that's coming down to the level of the claim. No, I wouldn't do that. I would stay up with the nature of what God is. What is God? You see, what is God? I might, for instance, like with this, there's no law of disease, I might make the statement that there's no lack or limitation of anything, but then I forget it entirely and get right up into the major point, which is what is the nature of God? You must remember this. From our standpoint, we're not physicians. Therefore, we're not dealing ever with specific diseases. Not ever are we dealing with specific diseases. And nor are we trying to exchange a belief of bad health for a belief of good health. What we're trying to do is realize God. Then in that realization, it makes no difference what the nature of the claim is. It would disappear. Now, let me illustrate that for you. Supposing a call came, and the patient didn't name the disease. Or supposing they didn't know the name of the disease. Or suppose they had a diagnosis and the doctor made a mistake in the name of the disease. What good would it do to be knowing anything about anemia? You see what I mean? Yet that wouldn't prevent the healing, would it? No. So, let's assume that nobody knows anything about the disease anyhow. And begin right with our treatment. What is the nature of God? And as we dwell on that truth of the nature of God, something does begin to unfold within us that lifts us up and helps us and brings us to a state of realization, and the patient receives their healing. Whereas if we keep our treatment down on the nature of the disease itself, all we're doing then is trying to get rid of a certain disease. We might just well be in materia medica or mental healing, which has nothing to do with spiritual healing. Now another thing comes in there. Is there a condition apart from God? Well, then whatever it is that these people are calling anemia must also be a part of God's being. No use denying it, is there? There can't be God, an infinite God, good, and a disease, can there? No. All right? Then whatever it is that somebody is thinking of as a disease can't really be disease, so there's no use of treating it as if it were. You remember the illustration in The Infinite Way of the snake in the rope? All right? Here's, instead of a snake, we have a green stem over here. And supposing to my bad vision over here that appears as a snake. Now what would be the use of my worrying about snake and knowing truth about snake or denying something about snake when snake doesn't even enter the picture, does it? The thing I would have to do would begin to know the truth of what is there, not anything about what isn't there. Well, now, anemia is never any place, is it? So what's the use of bothering about it? Let's find out what is there. Okay? And one thing we know is there. Omnipresence makes it absolutely assured that God is there. And so as we dwell on that, that is where, you see, that is where the Infinite Way differs from most of the metaphysical teachings on treatment. Yeah. In that we never touch the person the name of the person, the disease, or the name of the disease in our treatment. Our treatment begins with the word God, ends with the word God, and stays in God. It never takes in the name of a human being. It never takes in the name of their disease. It never takes in their condition. It stays right up here always in the realm of God. You say, well then, how do they get the benefit of it? They get the benefit of it because of their contact, like the woman who came through the throng and touched the hem of the robe. Jesus didn't know she was there. How about the centurion's servant? He didn't know that help was asked for him, but he got the benefit of it. Why? The centurion's servant was in the centurion's consciousness. The centurion brought himself to the master consciousness. The whole thing. So that if you bring your cat or your dog or your bird to me, they don't know you're asking metaphysical help, you see? Don't know anything about it. But they're going to get it. Not only are they going to get it, but here, you can watch this. It's the most wonderful thing in the world to watch. If you have an animal or pet at home, and you ask me for help, I've never been in your home and I've never seen that pet, and I help it, let me come into your home, that pet's going to jump right up on my shoulder or my lap. They're not going to leave me. They're going to keep rubbing and rubbing and rubbing. They know that they've been helped and they know who did it. They may never have seen him before. I've had this happen now for 20-odd years. I've been watching this, experimenting with it. There isn't a cat or a dog or a bird that doesn't know when they receive a treatment. And they know who it comes from, even if they've never met them. So that when they do meet them, they rush right up to them and greet them like a long-lost friend.
How do you explain that, really?
The mere fact, you see, that we are all united. There's only one consciousness. We're all united in that consciousness. And the only thing that keeps human beings from that is their reasoning mind. I mean, if human beings didn't depend so much on their reasoning mind, they also would have the same thing. In other words, there are people who are enough above the reasoning mind so that they instantly know when they're in the presence of spiritual consciousness. Other people don't anymore recognize a Jesus Christ than they would recognize a tramp on the street, you see. That's because they got too much here, not enough here. But the people who are sensitive, who are spiritually developed, bring them into the presence of a spiritually developed person. It wouldn't make any difference if they were out in their fishing clothes. They'd be recognized, you see. And so it is. An animal hasn't so much of that reasoning mind, that conscious thinking mind, and so they are receptive. That's why they and children are more receptive to treatment than adults. A child is very simple. So is an animal. But that is because they are more in that pure consciousness than they are in human consciousness. Yes, our treatment stays up there in God continuously. And it never touches the name of a person or the name of a disease or any of the symptoms of a disease. Never takes them into consideration. Well, of course, to me, it was the most fascinating experience of my life. I don't know how much it might interest you because you haven't quite the same view of it that I have. I mean by that, you haven't seen a strange background of the infinite way. See, the infinite way had no European, no foreign entree at all. Well, I could go back a little further and say that the infinite way had no entree anywhere at all except to a few Christian scientists who stuck with me after I left the Christian Science movement. The rest of the world was completely in ignorance of me or the infinite way. I had no acquaintances outside of Christian Science, and very few that stuck to me after I left Christian Science. So that there was no way for this to be known in the world. And of course, we have never advertised, and I've never left my home except when I was called out. And so watching the spread of this has been a very interesting thing, to see how it all came about without a single trace of a human footstep. And so the same applied in even greater degree with Europe. There wasn't a soul in Europe who knew of me or of the infinite way, and yet all of a sudden an article appeared in a magazine which was very complimentary to the infinite way and gave the book itself a wonderful write-up. And it was a magazine I'd never heard of and a man I'd never heard of. Well, naturally, I was inside of Christian Science, he was out. And how did he get the book? Somebody sent it to him for a gift. He liked it, he wrote this article. He liked it and he wrote more articles. Then he wrote me and asked if I would write articles for it. And out of the clear blue sky, something happened that actually couldn't happen. This was at a time when there was a scarcity of paper in England, and nobody could get books published, nobody from this side of the water, and very few over there. The scarcity was so great. A publisher asked permission to publish The Infinite Way. It was unheard of, but it happened. And that is the only contact in Europe that The Infinite Way has had. Well, here in October, I was sitting in Hawaii in meditation, and the voice said to me, go to New York for the month of November and a few days of December, and then go to London. Now, why? I haven't the faintest idea why, because I had nothing over there, nothing to do over there, didn't know anyone over there. But when the voice speaks, you obey. I went to New York, and I spent the month of November there, and had a couple of classes, 4 classes. When they were over, well, here I am. There was no further word about London. And I remembered that the voice had said, and a few days in December in New York. So I waited, and finally the 5th of December came, and the voice said, Wednesday for London. Wednesday I flew to London. Got there, went to a hotel. I said, well, Father, I'm here, but now what do you want? And I tell you something, that it was a mystery and a miracle. I was there a week, and I went to the continent, came back. I was there 10 days. And when I left London, 2 more of my books had been put in publication. All of the Infinite Way writings are now cataloged by 2 publishing houses over there for the entire world, and I'm going back in October for lectures and a class. It's really, it's the strangest thing how one thing after another. One publisher, I didn't know either of these publishers would have cataloged them. So nothing about them. Was sent to them for books. When I got there, they asked, didn't I think that they could sell some Infinite Way books by cataloging them? Sure. Both publishers are cataloging them. One publisher asked, could he publish a British edition of Leave Your Nets? Sure, as far as I'm concerned, I love it. Well, he did that. Then the publisher of The Infinite Way over there asked me if I didn't have any new manuscripts. Well, it just so happens that I finished a book called Living the Infinite Way and sent the manuscript back to Honolulu to be retyped. But I have a rough draft of it in my grip that I brought over to read. I'll be glad for you to see it. He saw it and he said, oh, we want to publish that. So those are the things that kept happening over there that I still can't figure. I don't understand it all. I know that this thing that we call God, this absolute infinity within us, that as it takes over an activity, it performs these things. And for us to be a witness to them and see what happens is a miracle. There too we come to a major point in the infinite way. I live, yet not I, Christ liveth my life. There comes a point in this work where we seem to make an actual transition from living our own lives to finding things like that happening. Direction, government, protection, all these different things happening, and we just stand there and watch them and wonder how it happened and what it is, because the thing that does it is invisible. And certainly the thing that does it is not known to our reasoning mind, and there's no way to find out how it's done, why it's done, where it's done. You just watch every day and see the miracle of it being done.
Mr. Goldsmith,
Yeah.
do you feel that there is a possibility?
No.
Is there, what is the difference, or I know you don't try to compare teaching, but what do you feel is different in the teaching of the infinite way than other metaphysical teachings who feel that the Christ consciousness is what we are trying to attain, that we know that there's nothing but God, and that is the consciousness that we are, the only thing that we are interested in? I mean, what is the difference in that?
I don't think there's any difference in that
No
phase.
difference.
No, not in that phase of it. You see, any teaching that is, shall we say, the development, cultivation of that mind that was in Christ Jesus would be the same no matter what its name or what its nature would be. That's right. And that's why I say that I can't organize this or call it mine or make a church out of it, because it is a universal truth. Now, there are differences in the application of that. There is no difference in the basic teaching, because the entire basis of the infinite way actually is the Gospel of John.
But the application is always up to the individual.
Yes, but the application it's not always up to the individual, but it is up to, there are individual approaches, there are individual facets, or there are ways in which one individual is different than another. But there are difference in teachings on the application and well, let's take the subject of treatment. Having been in Christian Science 16 years, I can tell you that infinite way treatment has no relationship to Christian Science treatment. None whatsoever. We're as far apart as the two poles on the subject of treatment. Firstly, because we don't have a mental cause for a physical disease. We're apart on unity in the same way. That we do not have a mental cause for a physical disease. We do not claim that resentment causes rheumatism or jealousy causes cancer or any of these things. We do not, in the infinite way, touch at all on a mental cause for a physical disease. So in that regard, we differ. Secondly, and there again you see, that has not a difference of a basic principle, that's a difference of an application.
No, and that is either accepted or rejected by the individual.
Yes, well that's what I say. Yes, but then, yes, but that's why I say that I'm only speaking now of the difference that is in the teaching. Mm-hmm. Now, there is no basic difference in the teaching of the nature of God, the nature of Christ, and the development of Christ consciousness. That there can't be. Firstly, as I say, that as far as the infinite way is concerned, you find it all in the Gospel of John. Everything is right there in the Gospel of John. And that is so universal that I would hardly want to claim any originality or anything of that kind for it. But from that point on, each of these movements has developed certain things within them that I can't accept, and they're not included in the infinite way. I mean, I personally couldn't accept, and I have not included in the infinite way. I don't have anything to do with the students who want to accept it. I have no objection to that. I have only stated the infinite way as my individual experience. What they do is I have no laws, no rules, no regulations. But I state definitely that any teaching that says there's a mental cause for a physical disease is absolutely not in the realm of spiritual truth. That is an invention that came into the world in the middle of the 19th century and has been perpetuated here and there in different teachings to greater degree or lesser degree. For instance, in Christian Science, do you have Christian Science background or unity? Unity.
And before that, Christian Science.
I see. Well, now, in Christian Science, you probably remember
I've read quite a bit of
that there are two teachings in Christian Science. There's a mental teaching and a spiritual one. For instance, you have the teaching that ignorance, sin, and fear is the procuring cause and foundation of all disease. We have nothing to fear but sin, so forth and so on. And fear. Oh, fear causes fevers and this and that and the other thing. Now, in those same books, it says, neither disease itself, sin nor fear, has the power to cause disease or relapse. Can a condition that's been healed in Christian Science return through sin or fear? Your answer is no. Neither sin nor fear can bring on disease nor bring back disease. Yeah? That goes all the way through. Mortal mind causes disease, but immortal mind cures it. There is no mortal mind. The term is a solecism denoting nothingness. Now, you see that the difference between the infinite way and that is that we have one premise. Now, you'll find that premise in Christian Science in those passages that say God is the only cause and the only effect. You see what I mean? But then the others have to be eliminated. In the same way, Mazzetti has a statement that man has not a single quality underived from deity. But when I was elected or appointed prison reader in New York, I was given a notice from Mrs. A that prison workers must protect themselves from sin-filled thoughts. But man has not a single quality underived from deity. Where does he get sin-filled thoughts? You see what I'm getting at? Now, somewhere or other, the time comes when you can't accept both, and so you choose whether you're on the mental side, where you want to find the sin and get rid of it and overcome the disease, or whether you want to start from the basis that sin isn't any more real than the disease that it's supposed to produce, and start from God as the only cause. So then, you will find that in the infinite way, it has a likeness to Christian Science in that part that has God as the only cause and the only creator and the only effect. You see that? But it will differ from Christian Science in that mental approach. In the same way, the infinite way will completely omit all of Mrs. Eddy's theology. It just will not accept the fact that Jesus died for our sins and that because he did, that we're all absolved and we can go into heaven on his... I mean, all those different things. You see what I mean? So that there is a wide difference there. In the same way...
Forever you get it. I mean, it's developing the Christ consciousness.
That's right.
I just can't see it. I mean, that's the only thing I want to accept about any of them.
No, but you can see that each of them differs in these approaches. Not in the basic fact, but in these approaches in what we call either treatment or their acceptance of different modes or means or theologies or mental practices. And there's where your differences come in. Your difference can't ever be in the original basis, in the original idea of the development of Christ consciousness. I'll tell you another. All of these things where we're given that man is a reflection, or man is an expression, or man is an image. Many of the teachings have that in. I can't accept that in the infinite way. Now, that has nothing to do with the fact that the basis is the development of Christ consciousness. But it does have a difference in one's approach as to what constitutes individual being. And you'll find that the difference that comes in is in your approach to truth, which determines your development of the Christ consciousness. Now, there are people who, and that was my approach, my original beginning, who heal without any knowledge of how it was done. I was a hero long before I heard the term Christian Science. Very honestly, I didn't know how. No idea, because I had no processes. I never gave a treatment. I never knew anything about treatment, and I didn't say God because I didn't know any God. All I knew was that if somebody asked for help, I'd say, sure. And in a few minutes, they were well. But how it happened or why it happened, I had no knowledge. That was my coming in. Now there are loads of people who have some developed sense of the Spirit that enables them to heal. So far as they're concerned, it wouldn't make any difference then whether you call man a reflection, an expression, or God itself, because it has nothing to do with their knowledge of truth. But this has been my experience, that those students who haven't come to this plane with that kind of a consciousness and who want to learn must learn through the letter of truth. You shall know the truth, truth will make you free. Learn the letter and abide the Spirit. There's nothing truer than that. And what happens to these people who are playing around with every side of truth and not one actual principle? Well, I watched it for 16 years, and I can tell you that these people who today were saying that fear caused this, and the next day that only God is the cause, the next day that mortal mind caused this, and the next day there is no mortal mind, they went along 20 years in science and didn't know any more about it at the end of 20 years than they did when they began. Because they did not have one specific principle laid out for them that they could follow in an orderly fashion and hew to that line of that principle. Oh no. One day they were worrying whether they had been sinful or whether they'd been unkind to their mother-in-law. And the next day they were worrying why God wasn't doing something for them. Then they were wondering why, if they missed church Sunday, if that had something to do with it, or if their contribution was. And so, instead of having a definite principle, they were volleying back and forth. Well, I see the same thing today. I have students come who have got every mixture of metaphysics in the world, and they don't know a single principle of one of them. They mix them around just as much as mixing languages. We down in Hawaii have what we call pidgin English. It's a little mixture of Hawaiian, Japanese, Chinese, and English. And I tell you, some of the metaphysics I hear, just that mix. Because they haven't a specific principle on which they stand in the presence of any appearance to the contrary. And that is the point of difference, that not in the basis of spiritual consciousness, because I want to tell you, read the Chinese, read the Hindu, read the Japanese, read John, and you'll find that there were individuals who knew the basic principle all the way back to Adam. But they differ as widely in their approach to it as our metaphysics do today. Oh, well, anybody can find God that wants to find God. That's why I said that I don't care whether a person has a church or hasn't. I personally don't care whether they have a religion or not. I found God long before I ever heard of church. It's one of the greatest blessings that ever came into my life, that my mother was able to say to me when I was a young boy, Joel, there's only one thing bothering you. You've got to find God. The only help I can be to you is to say, stay away from churches. And I stayed away, too. I didn't go to a church till I was way up in the 30s. But I found my God. You don't need church for God.
God is individual.
Well, certainly.
It's a problem no matter how you read it.
Certainly. So each one has to find it in their own way. And one finds it in church, but there are countries that haven't got churches. Is that going to bar people from finding God? No. We're going to find God. But it is within the right of everyone who has an experience to share that experience with any who can follow along that way. And that's what's happened in the history of the world for all the way from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob of the Old Testament on up through Jesus, John, Paul, that each one that found some particular approach that met their need shared it with the rest of the world. And so there are people today who get along beautifully with Paul's teachings, and there are others who can't accept them, but can do beautifully with John. And so it is that as you study the other religions, you'll find that there are certain facets of the religion in India that many people cannot follow, and there are others that they can. China, Japan, the same way. But throughout all history, everyone who has had a God experience has, in some way, written it down or passed it on to others. Even men like Walt Whitman have given us his religion in his poetry. Emerson has given us his nature of religion. He left the church so that he could be free to tell what he knows about God and religion. And he did that in his essays. And it was a brave thing for him to do because he was fourth or fifth generation of ministers in his family. And yet he left the church so as to be free to tell what he knows. And of course there are loads of people today who get along beautifully with Emerson's writings and have found God through their study of Emerson or Whitman. Many people have had the actual spiritual illumination through Walt Whitman. And so each one, as they have an experience, sets it down, sets it forth. In Unity you have the same thing. Was healed through reading the first edition of Science and Health. Her first healings were based on the first edition of Science and Health. Her first group of healers all worked through the first edition of Science and Health. Then, as things began to expand in her consciousness, she didn't need Science and Health anymore. There were other things that took its place, and the first thing you know, there was a unity movement. Yes, but then later came Emma Curtis Hopkins, and then came Emily Cady, and all the rest of these, out of Christian Science, also to bring forth their exposition as it was to them. And that will go on forever and forever and forever. There will be some who, through personal ambition, ego, will write books and present teachings that are not based on an actual religious experience. There are loads of those books available. But there will never be a time in the history of the world when those who have a religious experience will not reveal it to others of their particular day. And of course in our day that's being done through writings or recordings or radio broadcasting. But there will always be an individual contact with God that will just have enough of individuality in it to make it interesting to other people. So we're always going to have that. But the basis of it will never change. One day, we're going to learn an ultimate truth, and that is that there isn't a written statement of truth that is true, nor is there a spoken statement of truth that is true. Not one. That is ultimate truth. Truth isn't a word, and truth isn't a statement, and truth isn't a writing. Truth is a state of consciousness, and it's a state of consciousness that operates without the thought or spoken word. That's ultimate truth. And there have even been teachings in the world based on that. The only thing is that teaching it is limited to the few. For instance, Zen Buddhism teaches without the spoken or written word. Then, I don't know whether it's there now because of war conditions, but in Yugoslavia, there was a Hebrew seminary, and all teaching was done without the spoken or written word. All of it, everything was done. All rabbis were turned out without ever hearing a word or reading a word. Well, it wasn't all meditation. It wasn't all meditation. It was a state of consciousness, like the animals being healed. They don't get words, do they? You can't speak the truth to an animal. If you do, it's for your own sake, not for theirs, because they certainly don't know what you're talking about. And yet you heal them. And you heal them without a spoken word or read word or thought word. By a state of consciousness, and they catch that state of consciousness. And so ultimately there will be teachings again where ultimate truth is revealed. And you'll find that when ultimate truth is revealed, there's no such thing as my truth or your truth or his truth or her truth. Truth is a state of consciousness. And it's a state of being, not a state of thinking, not a state of thought, not even a state of knowledge. Truth is a state of being. And that is the point that we head toward. That day when truth can be revealed as a state of being without these. And that's why in our work, after we get beyond the closed class, when we get to practitioner groups and my private little groups, or personal groups that come over to Hawaii to see me, or New York or somewhere, that's where we get beyond the written word. You'll find that, some of it in those recordings. We get far beyond the written word there, because we get then to a state of consciousness. And you find that that's in the Hawaiian, the first and second Hawaiian series, a lot of it, and then in this last New York practitioner class, a lot of it. Because we're trying to introduce it more and more to where we see that there's no right, there's no room for a quarrel as to what is truth. None. Truth is a state of being. It isn't somebody's concept of what constitutes truth. It isn't somebody's belief of what constitutes truth. No, those things are only suffered to be so now to lay out a mode or means of arriving at the state of consciousness where truth reveals itself. And that's why I said that in all our work, we begin with a letter of truth, yes, but we stay there a very short time. When it comes to our healing work, we don't use any of these treatments. None of them. None of them. It's entirely done without the use of thoughts or words. And that's the way ultimately it has to be, because truth is universal. Huh? With a Christ consciousness.
I was going to say, is that what Mrs. Reddy means? You think how she said that the healing is done by divine?
Yes, that's exactly what she means. She says, I myself do not use mental argument for healing. You see? That's exactly what she means. A statement in the preface of Science and Health gave me the first clue to that. You see, when I was doing healing work, I tried to find out about it, and that's how I came later to study Christian Science. And then I became a practitioner. Not because I understood what was in the books, because I never did, in those early days, but because it was the only healing movement that I had ever heard of. I never heard of Unity or New Thought, any of those things. I'd only heard of Christian Science. And so I became a Christian Science practitioner. But I didn't know what was doing the work. And then I had an experience that was very pleasant. Some work that I did brought me in contact with the director of the Mother Church. And I went through class with him. And he got to know me pretty well. And when we went through class, the one thing I wanted to know about was what they call treatment. And that's the one thing he wouldn't talk about. And 3 times I put in a question asking him, what is treatment? He absolutely refused. And when the class was over and I went to him, I said, why wouldn't, I asked you 3 times, put in a question about treatment. Well, he said, you had more patients in the class than I did, and they all said they had beautiful healings. I don't want to spoil you. If you can heal without treatment, I'm not going to spoil you. And he said, I'm just as happy for the rest of the students, too, not to know it. The less they know about treatment, the better healers they'll be. Oh, so he knows something, too. But still he couldn't make clear to me what it was. But when I got home, in the preface to Science and Health, I read this statement, that there are other books on the subject, which are either plagiarisms or based on a misconception. They regard the human mind as a healing agency, whereas this mind is not a factor in Christian Science healing. Ah. So then what do we got to think for? What do you got to know anything for? What do you got to have anything for? That mind that you think with and that you know truth with isn't a factor at all. So I was right all the time in my healing work, only I didn't know what it was. Just so long as that mind isn't operating, you'll have instantaneous healing. When that mind begins to operate, you won't. You'll have long drawn-out healing. And so my healing work was always based on no treatment, nothing of that kind. Very often, I had to get this way and sit and wait until that deep breath came. But that's all. And that's all my healing work's ever consisted of. I've never known such a thing as mental argument or treatment, except in teaching. And the teaching was to those who didn't seem able to grasp the fact that there is no truth that's really true. There's no truth that'll really heal anybody. There is a state of consciousness that will heal. There's no truth written in a book. Of course, if there was, buy the book and learn the statement of truth and go out and heal. But you can't do it. I don't care whose book you buy, whether it's Bible or textbook or anything else. You can't heal with it. You can only develop a certain state of consciousness. Then that state of consciousness does the healing work. And if you have books that give you approximately the truth of being, you can develop that healing consciousness. Now, in my mind, there's no question about it that a person can develop that state of consciousness very beautifully with Emily Cady's Lessons of Truth. And if you can once see through Mrs. Eddy's writings and separate the mental from the spiritual and stick to the spiritual, you can develop it too. But if you read all the books the way they're written, you never will, except by accident. Never will on purpose, because too much of a mixture there. You're floundering around one day with mental science, the next day with spiritual. You won't get anywhere. But any one of them that'll give you a definite principle. Mr. Jeffries had his first book. And anybody that can't benefit by that book, his first book on healing, marvelous book. He sticks to an absolute principle. But that's the thing. It's the development of consciousness that does it. It is not. No. But certain statements of truth will develop, and practice along that line of actual truth will develop that consciousness. But you have to be sure that it's really a consistent statement of truth, not a volleying back and forth between a lot of things that...
Well, how do you put it into the mind if there isn't any repetition of a thought or an affirmation or anything? I don't think I could get anything into my subconscious or conscious mind, so it would be an automatic coming
you
forth.
could.
I didn't pour it in there with a
Oh, yes,
hammer.
yes. So it's all right to pour it in with a hammer, but do it if you do it in this way. For instance, let us take the subject of meditation. We'll take a statement, scriptural statement. He performeth that which is given me to do. Now, I would take that statement. He performeth that which is given me to do. Instantly it brings to my thought, oh yes, there's another similar statement. He perfecteth that which concerneth me. Two very similar things there mean the same thing, little different words, but it means something. Now what does it mean? He performeth. Who is he? Who is the he that performeth? Unless I find out who that he is, that statement's going to be meaningless. Now, who is that he? He performeth that which is given me to do. And as I think a little while, all of a sudden I remember Jesus said, the Father within me doeth the work. He performeth. The Father within me. That's the he that performeth. Father within me? Oh, yes. And then I remember Paul says, I can do all things through Christ. Oh, Christ is the He that performeth. Now we're getting somewhere. Christ within me, the Father within me. Oh, there's another statement. He that is within me is greater than he that is in the world. He that is within me. Now it's then he that is within me that performeth that which is given me. You see what I'm getting at?
Mm-hmm.
Now, you go along on that line, bringing to your conscious thought the many different ramifications of that statement, and you'll find that you haven't drilled it into you by affirmation, but by actually coming into the enlightenment of what that statement means. See that? Now, the same way, you might take, it might come to you someday that thy grace is my sufficiency. Well, there's no use of just saying 1,000 times thy grace is my sufficiency, because all that will do for you is hypnotize you. That's a form of auto-suggestion, cooeyism. But now let's take that statement into meditation. Thy grace is my sufficiency. Thy grace. Well, now we're back again to who is thy, thee. And again we find, of course, that it means the Father within me. It means this divine presence within me. But it says that its grace is my sufficiency. And now what's grace? Let's look up the word grace. And we find that it's a gift of God, something not earned, not something not deserved, the free gift of God. Then this gift of God, this thing that I don't even have to be worthy of or deserving of, don't have to earn it, this free gift of God is my sufficiency. What is sufficiency? Everything that I need. It doesn't make a difference whether, in my thought, it's housing, clothing, feeding, companionship, or whatnot. This gift of God, then, is my fulfillment. Oh, and immediately we have the word fulfillment. I am come that ye might be fulfilled. There we are again. This same Father, the same I, the same Christ. Its purpose is that I be fulfilled, that I have sufficiency. Do you see how 10 minutes, 15 minutes of that, and you'll get up and say, well, then what have I got to worry about? See? Now that is the way all of my work is done.
Well, that would put it into the consciousness faster and better than...
Sure, because it was through understanding. You see, the other way isn't
That's
understanding.
for the reason.
That's right. And you get the meaning behind it. This other way, you might just well say, every day and every way I'm getting better and better. Why? Who's making me better? What's making me better? Just taking that statement? You see what I mean? And so it is. Yes, that's vain repetition. This idea of belief. You see, a statement of truth is an effect. Now, an effect can't heal. But a truth understood is a cause. See the difference? As long as it's a statement in a book, it's an effect, and you can't heal with it. But the minute you understand that statement, it becomes a cause of harmony. Any statement of truth understood is part of your consciousness. But a statement of truth out here in a book, it's just an effect. It's a quotation, and quotations are not God or Christ. That is right. And you have to absorb the meaning, you see. And so, when we say, he that is within me is greater than he that is in the world, you don't understand that the he is this Father within, this Christ, this very Son of God, the I that has come that you might be fulfilled. When you understand that, then you rest. Oh, well, there's something greater than that. It's invisible, but now I can trust it. I've seen it from Moses all the way up to Jesus. See? And that is our method of study. That's our method of treatment. That's our method of self-enlightenment. Getting at the meaning of these statements of truth until they become a part. Then they develop the Christ consciousness.
So you think the majority of people, including myself, are quite prone to take this book says so-and-so, and they take that explanation and it's all right. They don't stop to think it through for themselves. Do I believe so-and-so, or what does this mean?
That's right. And that is why...
so-and-so, and that's good enough.
That's right. And that's wrong.
Whoever so-and-so says that.
That's right. And that's all wrong, and that's why the world makes so little progress. Don't forget, you know, that the Bible has been in existence 300 or 400 years. Right? A lot of people have the words memorized in it. And how much good does it do most of them? Outside of metaphysics. And in metaphysics, it doesn't do them enough good for the amount of years they've been at it. For that very reason, that all you hear is, oh, Mary Baker Eddy said this, or Myrtle Fillmore said this, or Joel Goldsmith said this, or Mr. Jeffrey said this. That's no good. That's no good. I tell our classes that the truth I'm telling you isn't the truth. It was the truth when it came to me. I'm telling you about the truth so that you can take it into your consciousness and find the truth for yourself. You see? I don't want anybody to rely on the fact that it says so in my books.
Well, it won't help me as long as it's in yours.
That's right.
Not mine.
That's it. It has to be in yours. And that's what makes it an individual thing, and that's why it can't be an organized thing, because you have it, and you can't even give it to your own members of your own family, except in proportion to their readiness to put it into themselves. And so, one of the weaknesses of organization is that 25 people get together, or 2,500, and think that because they're all together that God's blessing them. The only thing that blesses them is what takes place in their individual consciousness.
Mr. Goldberg, do you think, maybe this is the wrong type of question to ask, but do you think Christian Science will ever come out of that rock
You bet I do. They're coming out so fast. They're coming out so fast, make your head swim. Two of my students had beautiful articles in the journal in January, yes. 2 beautiful articles. They keep publishing articles like that, there'll be a beautiful awakening.
What happens that work comes to the
But,
fore?
excuse me, just 1 minute, huh? Don't blame Christian Science for that.
No,
That is the fault that comes the moment you start to work in bulk, in numbers. You see? The minute work isn't individual, then you have to find an average, and you label your work, you aim it at your average, and then you stop all the other questions. And you reduce it to a rote or a ritual. It's not the fault of the teaching, it's the fault of what happens. I'll illustrate that. In the beginning, when a person went to a Christian Science practitioner, the practitioner explained truth to them, along with the treatment, along with the healing. The result was that they got a book and they began to study, you see. Now, as time went on, and a practitioner got too many patients, they couldn't do that. So they just gave an absent treatment and let the patient go and find their own way. Then later on, when Miss Eddy found out that so many practitioners couldn't give the time and attention to teaching, she stopped them from teaching and appointed teachers to do teaching. Yes, but the first thing that happened, they got so busy that they could only teach 1 class a year. Well, you can't teach truth in 2 weeks. You know that, don't you? Nobody can learn truth in 2 weeks. And so the organization began that which is the limitation. Do you see that? Now, that same thing applies with any movement. Your teaching in print finally gets down to the level of the lowest mentality, not the highest. Because the highest never get a chance to ask their questions. They just get the simple little articles. And
well, what I had reference to mostly was that their narrowness about the reading and the other.
Well, that isn't narrowness. It's narrowness. That's right. That's right. Well, they're right in that. They're right in that because the average person hasn't the capacity to read a lot of things and know what they're doing after they do it. That's what's happened in the metaphysical field. You go into a lot of centers, they'll have a class in the morning on Judge Troward, and they'll have a class at noon on Lillian D. Waters, and they have a class in the afternoon on Mr. Jeffrey. And by the time the students go home at night, they got a headache. They've heard truth from every different angle in the world. They're not capable of anything like that.
Well, suppose you start on Christian Science, then do you think that you could continue?
No, you see, You see, there again, I'm going to tell you about individuality. I believe that every individual should search until they find that which meets their particular state of consciousness and then stay with it. Not volley back and forth and back and forth. Stay with that which meets it. There's something within the heart of every individual that says, this